My name is Tali Horowitz. I'm the New York Education Director for Common Sense. As you probably know, Common Sense is a nonprofit dedicated to helping kids thrive in our digital world, which is needed now more than ever. I'm so glad we're able to come together for what we're calling our Common Sense Conversations. This is a national digital iteration of our regular local talks. We've created this series of webinars tapping our favorite experts to offer real-time advice for navigating the dilemmas you may be experiencing at home right now during the pandemic. I also wanted to share that Common Sense just launched a brand new platform called Wide Open School, designed specifically to address the many issues that the coronavirus quarantine has created for families and teachers. I literally visit it every day. The URL is wideopenschool.org. And our partners include Sesame Street, Nat Geo, PBS Kids, Scholastic, and Noggin, among many others. You can see the full list on the site. And it's really designed as a single stop for the resources we all need right now. You can sort by interest and by age. I hope you'll take some time to explore it afterwards. I'm thrilled that today we have Dr. Karen Hopkins, who is a clinical associate professor of pediatrics at New York University's Grossman School of Medicine. She's the Associate Program Director of the Fellowship Program in Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics at NYU and the Director of the Developmental Behavioral Pediatric Service at Bellevue Hospital Center. She's a native New Yorker and has practiced in the city for over 20 years, providing assessments and treatment management for countless numbers of children with a wide variety of developmental conditions, all of which makes her the perfect person to talk with us today about our preschoolers. We're so happy to have her with us today, but before we get started, let me just give you a short overview of what to expect. You're on mute because we have hundreds of people on this webinar, but you do have the ability to ask questions to Dr. Hopkins. If you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. Press that and you'll be able to type in questions. My colleague, Melanie Strauss in New York, will be sharing information back with you. My other colleague, Lisa Solomon in LA, will be monitoring the chat during the discussion. We'll take your questions probably closer to the end of our session at about the half-hour mark. And if you can't stay for the whole 45 minutes webinar, don't stress about it. We'll be posting this video online so you can see it in the future. We'll also keep you informed about many other webinars happening over the next few weeks. And lastly, you may have heard there's been some issues with Zoom bombing. If this happens, we'll end the webinar immediately and we'll try our best to reschedule. So with that, let's get started. Dr. Hopkins, thank you so much for being with us. And
for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And to start us off, how can we talk about the virus with little kids? How do we describe it?
Well, the way that I usually tell parents to describe it, and the way that I even describe it myself when I'm talking to young children, is that to say that the virus is caused by a germ. Most children who are in preschool, or even if you're not in preschool, know about germs and how germs can make you sick. And sometimes I say it's like the germ that makes you have a cold or a stomach ache. It makes you stay home from school. And this germ is tiny, tiny, tiny. You can't see it at all, but it can cause sickness in a lot of people. So this is how I tell parents to explain when they say, well, why are some people wearing masks? Why are some people wearing gloves? They may see delivery people wearing gloves and masks. And so I try to say that the best way for us to protect ourselves is to stay at home right now. But if you have to go out, if people have to go out for work or go out to the store, then they should protect themselves with masks and gloves.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. Something else I've heard too is that reassuring kids that, this is something that's not really affecting little kids, but we want to help everyone. We want to make sure mommies and daddies and grandparents all stay healthy too. So we're staying in and keeping away.
Yeah, I think that is important because since they know that they can get the germs that cause a cold, they might start to feel like, well, maybe this is going to happen to me. And it is really true that children, especially young children, hardly ever get this condition. And if they do get it, it's very mild, but they could understand better, I think, if you talk about it well, it could really be dangerous for people like grandma and grandpa, or if they have older relatives that they know.
So I know this is a very anxiety-provoking time for a lot of us. How can we manage our own anxiety, because we know that our little kids are picking up on it? Any tips around that?
Well, so probably lots of people who are watching there's like a flood. I feel like there's a flood of information about managing anxiety. And sometimes it's just overwhelming. There's so many things you can look at and so many things you can read. And it all is anxiety provoking, even actually all that information sometimes. So I think the most important thing to do is to acknowledge that you are anxious, and to also understand that it's okay to be anxious, that everybody is anxious, even people who seem in control. Even, for example, if people are watching from New York State, Governor Cuomo, who seems like the most level-headed and the most calm person that we can watch on television, he's definitely anxious also. So everyone is, and that's okay. Also to know that, yes, young children pick up on your anxiety. So even if you think you aren't transmitting it, you are, in your tone of voice and the way you may move around. So understand that. And then to try and figure out what works for you to try and manage the anxiety. So things that I talk about people should do are, first, again, acknowledge it. Second, figure out if there are people you can talk to about it. If you have a partner at home, that person, hopefully. If you have family members you can connect with, if you have a religious institution or person that you're connected with, anybody that you can talk to now is going to be helpful in managing your anxiety.
Okay, great, thanks. What about the social impact for little kids? Do they miss their friends? Is it okay for them to FaceTime?
So I think this is a funny question, actually, because I think that parents feel like their preschoolers miss their friends a lot more than the preschoolers do even actually think about their friends. So I think that what I try to tell people is that preschoolers and toddlers, and especially toddlers, but preschoolers also, are very egocentric. It's really all about them. I mean, most people who have preschoolers understand that. And that's why sometimes when bad things happen, they think it's their fault. When bad things happen to their family or to other people, they think it's their fault because everything is about them. So the fact that they aren't seeing the children that they might play with every day in school, I think affects them a little bit, but I think it affects them a lot less than families think, because as long as they're getting attention, love, and feel kind of secure and stable at home and have outlets for their own play and enjoyment, I don't think that they think about their friends that much. I would bet that a lot of the play dates that are set up on a regular basis are arranged either by the parents or because they think it's important for children to connect socially outside of school, or by the babysitters who want to connect with other babysitters socially when they're taking care of preschoolers. So I think that's like one of the least things that you should worry about, that your children are missing their friends. And then in terms of FaceTiming, I think depending on your child's level of language and ability to interact verbally with their friends, that's going to really determine how important FaceTime is. FaceTiming with family members is different because usually the other person is an adult, and so they're going to be talking to your child as an adult would. But for 2, 3, or 4-year-olds to have an extended conversation online it might be fun for the parents to do it, but I think it's probably, and it might be a little bit interesting, but I don't think it's going to be that important.
I want to go back to something you said in terms of that egocentrism and how little kids might even be blaming themselves. So right. Is it something that directly we should be saying regularly to our kids, like this is not your fault, or kind of explaining it?
Well, sometimes you can get cues from children's behavior that they're thinking that it might be their fault. For example, if they start to withdraw a lot, if they start to become less engaged with you, if they start to seem sad and not as interested in doing the things that they used to do to make themselves happy, they might be thinking or feeling, well, I wonder if anything I did before caused this. I wonder if this is why mommy is acting like this. Did I do something? So you could say it, actually, not dwell on it. I think definitely not dwell on it, but I think it would be enough to say, don't worry that you did anything to cause this to be happening to our family, because you didn't. It's not your fault. It's just the fault of a virus, and the virus is traveling really fast, and it's just nobody knows how to control it, but we're starting to learn.
Okay. So I know many of us are eager for the quarantine to end. Any challenges you foresee with young children going back to regular life? Anything we should be thinking about now or preparing for?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that many people may have seen this when we had to transition to the quarantine, may have seen some regression in their children's behavior, so that children may have started to become more clingy than before, start sucking their finger again, or wetting their bed, or doing things that they used to do when they were younger, because everybody was so upset and confused and worried. And so regression is a common thing that happens when there's a big transition for young children. So they might see it again when the transition, whatever that looks like, the transition to another type of life happens. So that's one of the things that they might see. But another thing that I'm hearing a lot from parents of young children is that in the beginning of it, and because now we're like 2 or 3 weeks in, more than that even, it was much more stressful than it is now. And that so everybody has kind of gotten used to this way of being and being with each other. And a lot of parents are saying that the children seem less stressed than before, and they're just like having fun, and sometimes it's chaotic, but they seem more relaxed. And for one thing is your kids are getting you much more than they had before. For families that are working, they're just spending more time with you. There's not a lot of back and forth during the day, like they're not going from one activity to another. They're not being told to hurry up, let's change, we have to go here, we have to go there. All those things that parents do to enrich lives and to make their children have fun, but none of that is happening. So they're really just at home playing with their toys. So you might see some resistance when that has to stop. I know for sure that some very young children are really attached to their mothers. Specifically, I've heard this from several families, and their mothers are wondering, how am I going to separate again at the end of this? So at the end of it, or when we transition out into the real world again, we might see some of this regressive behavior and acting out behavior again.
Going back to your point about how some kids may be enjoying this less structured time, how important is it, in your opinion, to keep a regular schedule for little kids these days?
Yeah, well, it is. So some preschoolers, especially the 4 and 5-year-olds, they may be getting online work from their preschool or from their pre-K. So I think to the extent that you can keep them on that schedule for most of the week, it probably would help everybody's schedule at home. Because while unstructured time is fun and relaxing, if there's too much of it, it can become very confusing and disorienting for everyone. So if you can maintain some kind of a structure, then I think it will help you and it will help them. Children definitely do like predictable kinds of events and routine events to happen. And so if you can sort of set up maybe in the beginning of the week or the beginning of the day, okay, this is what will happen today. that will probably really be good for them. You know that in most preschools, there is some sort of an activity board or some kind of bulletin board or Post-its which tell the children in pictures usually what the day is going to be like, even if it's just a half day of school. So I think if parents can do that, it would be really helpful. And you might enlist their help in making some of the pictures to illustrate those events. I think that would be good.
Oh, I love that idea. So we know that kids are getting way more screen time right now. Any thoughts on how to manage this? Is it okay? Any concerns?
Everybody is getting more screen time, right? Not just children. And so that's just the reality of how we're living right now. Everybody has to be on screens more. And for some families, they have to be on screens a great deal of the day because of their work. And so the child is seeing the parents on screens. They may have older siblings who are on a screen because of school. So the child's seeing everybody do this more, so they're going to want it more as well. And I think everyone has to try and relax some of their hesitation and their limits on screen time that they have been trying to install over the past few years. It's hard enough to keep preschoolers away from screens on a regular basis. And so now it's even harder. And I think there's tons of wonderful content. Everyone can check out the Common Sense website for really good content and fun content, so that it will be content that will keep the child engaged and interested. So I think you can do that, and just try not to feel as guilty for when they're on screens.
That's helpful. Pushing aside the guilt.
It's really hard. I mean, a lot of these things sound really easy, but I know it's hard. It's really challenging. But the thing is, if you keep telling yourself, I'm doing the best I can, and really believe that, and if you feel less guilty, then you'll be more positive overall.
Yeah, that's helpful. Related to the screens too, for those of us who are lucky enough to be able to work from home, any tips on how to manage kind of getting our work done and, caring for little ones? And potentially we also had this question come in. Any tips on helping, if there's older siblings, helping them, manage their younger siblings too?
Yeah, it's very challenging if you're a single parent and you have to be on a screen for work and you have a preschooler and you have a school-age child. Imagine those scenarios. So the school-age child needs to be watching their teacher or doing their online work, and you will likely have to supervise that to some degree to make sure that happens. I've heard reports that up to 60% of children are not doing the online educational activities that they're supposed to. So it definitely, the kids need support for this. I think in high school and of course college, there more kids are doing it on their own and they're able to, but so you have to do that and you have to do your own work. And then you have this little preschooler running around and bouncing around the house. So to the extent that you can, schedule the child on their own screen time while you have to be working. Hopefully you're not working straight 8 hours a day. So you have various kinds of sessions where you might be on for 45 minutes and then off again for a while and then on again. So you can try and schedule your time with your preschooler in those breaks. And also if they're still taking a nap, obviously that's a good time to schedule a nap while you're having a meeting or something that you have to do online. And if you can do some stuff independently after hours, after the child's asleep, that's another thing you can do. So time that you might have spent in your office doing something independently, if you can do that after regular work hours or after the child's asleep, that will be helpful.
Yeah, and I think on that note, other suggestions we've been hearing from parents is, if you are in a two-parent household, kind of divvying up who can be present or semi-present, and potentially using FaceTime as a sort of virtual babysitter. So grandparents can be doing read
Oh,
aloud?
if they are able, that would be fantastic. And because again, usually the grandparent can keep a child engaged for longer than another child can. So if they can do an activity or read a book or something during a time when a parent has to work, that will be really good.
Yeah.
For people who are lucky to have two parents at home, that's the perfect opportunity, obviously, to divvy up working with a preschooler and a school-age child, doing your own work, resting, trying to get exercise, going food shopping, all these things that still have to be done. I didn't mention, physical activity and exercise yet, but I think that it is a great thing if you can do some kind of physical activity with your child or with your children. That's an opportunity for some sort of family exercise or activity. If you can go outside, that's even better. If you have a dog to walk, that's even better. Get the child involved with that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. On Wide Open School, we do have a section called Get Moving, which has a bunch of apps and ideas. And other things I've been seeing are even if you're in a smaller confined space, heading to the dinner table, can you jump like a bunny? Any way to incorporate an animal type game too, where you're getting that movement and can get some of that core building too.
Right, movement is a good thing. One game that I particularly like for both inside and outside for young children is to do like an alphabet scavenger hunt. So it takes a little bit of work on your part inside the house, but to try and hide things that something that illustrates A, something that's B. It's not so easy, but it's definitely something, and it's kind of rewarding because you can check it off. The child can draw the B. There are lots of things you can add onto it to make it educational and fun.
And that's a great way to involve an older sibling too.
Right, that's true. They could make up the scavenger hunt.
So we hear a lot about how resilient little kids are. Once the quarantine is relaxed, do you expect most of our little kids to bounce back?
Bounce back. I think it's going to depend on how we bounce back.
Mm.
That I think is going to be really the important thing. We probably can look to history for some of the answers to that, because this generation of young children, babies and young children, and even young school-age children are going to be called Generation C. I've already heard people talking about that. And so they're going to be different than our current teenagers. They're going to have a different reality in terms of how people have been saying, even when we open up again, how we move around in public spaces together, the size of public gatherings, the kinds of restrictions there may be or may not be, the kinds of precautions. This is going to have to be kind of part of normal life. So I think they will bounce back and be children and happy children as long as their home and parents can be stable and happy.
Yeah. So thinking about some of the behaviors you mentioned before, I know there's the regressions you mentioned. How can you tell how much of outbursts are just, typical 4 or 5-year-old frustration, from being home for over a month, and versus, they have a lot of energy or sensory needs? And how do we best deal with these overall? Any strategies for dealing with these types of outbursts, whether they're just developmentally appropriate or specifically related to the situation?
Right. Yeah. Again, so if you think about a preschool day, preschool teachers would never go through the whole day without some physical activity built in. They know how important that would be for young children to remain focused, to remain regulated, for their attention span. And so even on days when it's really bad weather outside, the teachers figure out something to do inside the building or inside the classroom. So I think that that's really important, to make sure that everyone is getting as much physical activity in some organized way as you can. So that's one thing. The other thing is to try and pull on all of the information or the knowledge you have about good child rearing, and to try and ignore minor bad behaviors or behaviors that you think are bad, and to try and continue to praise your child and sort of catch them being good. That's what we always talk about. So if you reward the good behavior with more attention, you'll get more of that. And sometimes that it seems almost counterintuitive, because what's a good behavior? A good behavior sometimes for a preschooler is sitting and playing quietly, or reading, or looking at books quietly, or doing something so that they aren't destructive or interfering. And those are the behaviors a lot of parents tend to ignore, because they say, oh, okay, I have 5 minutes, I can go and do X, Y, and Z. And everyone does that because that's just natural. But if you can remember to give praise or comment on the good behaviors, and not always just focus on the behaviors that you don't like. And then the other thing is, to the extent that you can, if you have other adults at home to help, to try and spend some special time with your preschooler. And you can even call it that during the day, even if it's 10 minutes. You can make a schedule that includes mommy's special time with, or daddy's special time with, and then that also really helps behavior.
Well, that connects nicely with my last question before I ask you for some takeaways. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of downtime? And, you know, I'm thinking about parents who may be feeling it all apprehensive, like, oh, my kid's, you know, not going to learn their letters or their sounds, or feeling like they're going to fall behind in some way.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of times what the kind of play that we do with preschoolers is educational anyway, even though it's not part of a standard curriculum in some way. So they're going to pick up that information. Most of the toys that are available for preschoolers and the games they have educational elements in them. I don't think that anybody needs to worry about that. Especially now in some of the public school systems, I think that they are recognizing that they're not going to even do that testing that they used to think was so important. That's abandoned for this year. So I think everybody's going to be relaxing standards a little bit, if people are worried about maintaining those kinds of standards. And if you're worried about maintaining your own standards, you're probably doing it. I think that you can relax with that.
Yeah, that's a helpful reminder that I think, you know, this is the new normal for right now. And really every day is a victory.
Every day that we pass is another day down. Yes, that's what I say. And they say the curve is flattening. I mean, it's still incredibly busy, and there's a lot of hardship still in the hospitals, but it's getting slightly better. So this is what we can hope for.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I'd love, just in closing, if you have any kind of final takeaways.
I think the takeaways are, this is an uncharted time for everyone, and you're doing the best that you can. And one other way to make sure you do the best you can, make sure you have a source of information and facts that you feel comfortable with and that you trust. And that will help you to know what you're supposed to do, and do what you're supposed to do, and feel good about that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think also, as much as possible for us to appreciate the small pleasures, and that we are getting extra time with our kids.
You are.
And in many ways, they're blissfully unaware. Thank you so much, Dr. Hopkins. This is
my pleasure. I hope to speak with you again.
Yeah, I'd love to offer you a big virtual round of applause. And in closing, to all our viewers, we'd love for you to check out wideopenschool.org and to share it with your communities, with your schools, with your neighbors. It should be really helpful right now. We'd also love for you to consider supporting Common Sense as we continue to build out this exciting new platform. Lastly, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's webinar at the same time. It'll be focused on older kids and teens with Dr. Cara Natterson. She'll be talking about parenting in this new terrain, and she's also the author of a new book called Decoding Boys. So thank you all again so much. Thank you again, Dr. Hopkins, and wishing everyone a smooth and healthy day.
And recovery.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye now.